Welcome back to Wisdom Unveiled. We are continuing our deep dive into Hakim Abul Qasim Ferdowsi's work, looking specifically at insights from conversations with Iranian philosophers, Dr. Ebrahim Dinani and Dr. Esmail Mansouri Larijani.
It's great to be back. And yet, while everyone knows the Shahnameh for its, epic stories and heroes,
Absolutely legendary.
right, but these sources, they really peel back the layers. They show this, profound philosophical thinking woven all through the poetry.
They really do. And just quickly, right at the start, our mandatory disclaimer. This deep dive is a translation and reproduction of conversations with those Iranian philosophers, Dr. Dinani and Dr. Larijani. Some concepts, some details might not be perfectly conveyed in translation.
It's a challenge, translating philosophy.
It is. So we do apologize in advance for any, discrepancies you might notice. And we really welcome your feedback and suggestions for improvement. Always. So this is deep dive number 8 in our series on Ferdowsi using these sources. And our mission today really is to understand Ferdowsi not just as that incredible poet,
Which he absolutely was.
undeniably, but to see him as a true Hakim, a sage philosopher. And we'll do that by exploring some key ideas highlighted in these conversations.
Exactly. And in our previous deep dives, using these same sources, we've already touched on the Shahnameh as a Hamasa.
An epic.
Yes,
Yeah.
an epic. And we talked about its foundation in Tawhid, that core idea of God's unity and the absolute central role of Qira'at or intellect in Ferdowsi's view of the world. Those are really foundational points from the sources.
Right, foundational. And building on that today, these sources guide us to, dig even deeper. We want to look at specific aspects of intellect, but also something fascinating, the unique way tragedy is presented in Ferdowsi's work and how it connects to life itself.
Yes, the sources present the Shahnameh as a true global epic, a Hamasa. They see it as easily on par with, maybe even going beyond things like Gilgamesh or Homer's Iliad and Odyssey.
Which is saying something.
It really is.
Yeah.
But as you said, what makes it stand out, according to these thinkers, is how it's deeply infused with Tawhid, that unity.
And within that huge epic structure, Ferdowsi tackles tragedy head on. But the way the source defines tragedy, it feels much deeper than just, a sad story or someone feeling bad.
Oh, absolutely. The sources are very clear on this. Tragedy isn't just like superficial pain or temporary sadness. It's described as the expression of these really deep, fundamental inner conflicts, the ones inside every single person.
Inner conflicts, like what specifically?
Well, think about the clash between our highest hopes, our aspirations, our ideals,
Yeah.
and then the stark reality of fearing death, fearing destruction. That fundamental human desire for something permanent, maybe immortality,
Yeah.
clashing right up against, no way, we're transient, we age, we eventually
Yeah.
stop. These aren't just everyday problems. The sources describe them as deep-seated internal wars.
Wow, internal wars. So if these conflicts are always there, deep down, does that mean life is just constant struggle? Is that the view?
Well, the sources offer a really interesting angle here. They view life itself as a kind of temporary tazala.
Tasala, what does that mean?
It means something like a reconciliation, or maybe better, a truce, a temporary truce between these deep, warring inner conflicts.
A truce, that sounds fragile. How is a truce like that even possible, let alone maintained, with those fundamental conflicts always simmering underneath?
Well, according to the sources, it's established and is maintained with help from some crucial things. Akal, which is intellect or reason.
Okay, intellect.
Diyanat, which refers to religion or faith.
Faith.
And tarbiyat, meaning training, discipline, maybe upbringing. So life, in this view, is essentially a temporary
Medaraka. Yeah.
another word for it, like a ceasefire in that constant inner war mediated by intellect and wisdom.
A ceasefire
Yeah.
mediated by intellect. So, okay, the baseline state, the original condition is this inner conflict, and life is the period where, ideally, using reason and faith and discipline, we manage that tension.
That's exactly the picture painted by these sources. The potential for this deep conflict is just inherent in being human. Life is let's say, the arena where we use these tools, especially intellect, to navigate and, manage that tension.
And you can really see this specific kind of tragedy, this deep conflict, playing out so vividly in the stories when it's not just a simple case of good versus evil. The source mentions a particularly profound kind of tragedy.
Yes, this is a really key insight from these conversations. The deepest tragedy isn't the fight between right and wrong. Because, when wrong is defeated, there's often a sense of justice, maybe relief, even happiness.
Right.
The truly profound tragedy, the one these philosophers are highlighting in Ferdowsi, Happens when the conflict is between two things that are both right.
Ah, okay. And the classic, absolutely heartbreaking example from the Shahnameh itself comes right to mind.
Exactly. The story of Rustam and Sorab. The source uses this as the prime example. Both of them were, in their own way, right. They had their duties, their loyalties. Rustam was upholding the kingdom. Sorab was searching for his father, fighting for his cause.
But they didn't know.
They were tragically unaware of that fundamental connection between them. So this collision isn't right versus wrong. It's two legitimate rights smashing into each other, leading to that devastating outcome.
And the source really emphasizes that in that kind of tragedy, when one side wins, there's no joy. It's actually the beginning of immense sorrow.
Precisely. Because you haven't defeated evil. One right has tragically destroyed another right. This is that specific, deep, painful human tragedy Ferdowsi explores. And it's this inner potential for such conflict that Ferdowsi, through the wisdom in his epic, aims to help us understand and maybe manage, mainly by using our intellect.
That's a really powerful way to look at tragedy. And the source also talks about why epics, these Hamasas, even come about. Why do cultures create them?
Yeah, the idea presented is that they tend to arise, they emerge, especially when human identity feels threatened, whether that's individual identity or, more often, collective identity, national identity.
So the thinking is, maybe Ferdowsi felt a real threat to Iranian identity in his own time. And that spurred the creation of this massive epic.
That's very much the implication drawn from the sources, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And they connect this right to today. They argue that in our current era, with things like soft war, cyber warfare, globalization forces that can make cultural or national identities feel, well, pressured or vulnerable.
Yeah, you hear that a lot.
Ferdowsi's Hamasa is still incredibly relevant, still vital for helping to preserve that core identity.
So it's not about shutting off from the world then. It's not anti-globalization.
Not at all, as presented in the source. It's not arguing for isolation. It's about acknowledging the need for global connection, but also recognizing the essential human need to hold on to your distinct identity, your heritage, your sense of self, while engaging with the wider world.
Right, maintaining identity within connection. Okay, now let's circle back, because we really need to dive deep into intellect, Kirad. The sources spend so much time on it, showing it's way more than just, the first creation.
Oh, definitely. There's that incredibly powerful verse they quote, Gusast Kirad, Peydarad be banned.
Whoever rejects intellect, his foot is bound. Bound by what, exactly? If you lack intellect or turn away from it, what binds you, according to these thinkers?
The sources are pretty specific here. Without intellect, you get bound by illusions, by worldly attachments that don't really matter, by blind desires that aren't really yours, by pointless wishes leading nowhere. It's like being tangled in countless chains, but they're internal, self-imposed chains.
And intellect is the way out, the key to breaking those chains.
It's presented as the only true key. The key that can unlock the sort of locked doors of the world and the self. Metaphorically, it's called Mifta al-Khazana, the key to the treasures. Any other keys we might think we have, tools, technologies, strategies, they're all ultimately products of intellect. Without that foundational key, the sources argue, humanity stays bound.
The source also mentioned the relationship between intellect, aqual, and the heart, dil. How does that work? Because often we think of them as opposite.
Right. We often do, but the source explicitly says there is no conflict between them in this framework. It's quite a statement.
So intellect isn't seen as just cold, hard reason fighting against emotion or intuition.
Not in this view, no. Intellect is described as being both Dalil, a guide, and Khalil, a friend, a close, intimate friend. So it correctly shows you the path, it guides you, but it's also a true, trustworthy companion walking alongside you on that path.
A guide and a friend. And it's not an enemy to anyone.
Fundamentally, the sources say intellect has no enemies. In fact, it has the power to turn enemies into friends.
How? How does it do that?
By removing ignorance. Y'all. Ignorance is identified as the root cause of most hostility, most enmity in the world. So, where true intellect shines, where understanding grows, enmity dissolves.
That sounds incredibly powerful, almost magical.
Well, they use the metaphor of kimia, alchemy.
Ah, alchemy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whatever intellect touches, it transforms into gold. It dispels ignorance, it illuminates darkness, it turns chaos into order. There's a beautiful line quoted, Kimia ke tabdilash kuni garchakun buad nilash kuni.
What does that mean?
It means something like an alchemy that you can transform. Even if it is blood, you make it the Nile. So taking something dangerous, chaotic, maybe even deadly like blood, and transforming it through intellect into something clear, life-giving, abundant, flowing like the river Nile.
Wow. That's a potent image. And intellect is also called the Iraj, the adornment of the soul.
Yes, the adornment of the soul or the life force. The argument in the sources is that real human beauty doesn't just come from looks or clothes. It comes from sure awareness, consciousness.
Like Socrates.
Exactly. Socrates is the classic example used. Not physically handsome by conventional standards, but seen as profoundly beautiful because of his intellect. Intellect elevates the human John, the life force, making it beautiful in a way that the life force in, say, a plant or an animal isn't. It gives inner beauty, Kult.
And this connects back to that earlier idea of intellect being the divine robe of honor, the Kaladi Izadi, because it was the first creation.
Precisely. As the first creation, it's seen as the very source of the beauty, the order, the measure we see in the cosmos. It's like the blueprint of divine beauty reflected everywhere.
Okay, so what about intellect, Aquil, versus knowledge, Dinesh? Are they the same thing, or is there a difference?
There's a key distinction made using a really nice metaphor. Knowledge, Dinesh, is compared to the earth.
Okay, earth.
And intellect, Aquil, is like the water that flows into that earth. Knowledge alone, just facts, data, formulas, like dry earth, can be barren, unproductive. But intellect, the water flowing into it, makes it fertile, green, fruitful. It produces what the source calls the greenery of Marifat, which is deep knowing, real understanding, gnosis.
So the implication is that intellect is actually more fundamental, maybe more important than specific knowledge.
That's definitely the strong sense you get from the sources. Knowledge is seen as a result of intellect, a product. You might use different degrees of intellect in different fields of study, sure. But without intellect flowing into it, knowledge can't be truly gained. And critically, it can't become fruitful. It can't lead to that deep knowing Marifat. Intellect is the prerequisite, the vitalizing force.
And this deep focus on intellect, it also brings hope. Is that connected?
Yes, absolutely. There's a very significant line quoted, Hamisha Kerdmand Omidvar.
Which means?
The person with intellect is always hopeful. Hope isn't just something nice to have. It's presented as an inherent quality of intellect itself.
Why? Why is intellect inherently hopeful?
Because, the sources argue, intellect, by its very nature, always sees and moves towards goodness. It's fundamentally oriented towards the good. It's not pessimistic. And since reaching goodness is its path, hoping for good is seen as its necessary consequence. And here's a really striking claim the sources make. Intellect never fails.
Never fails. That sounds bold. Things fail all the time.
Right. Other things in the world fail. Plans go wrong. Efforts fall short. But intellect itself, properly understood and applied, is seen as unfailing. It might encounter setbacks, obstacles, but it perceives these not as final defeats, but as steps, maybe bridges, on the way to higher stages or towards eventual understanding or victory.
Okay, so a life guided by knowledge and illuminated by this intellect is seen as easier, more rational. Cool.
Yes, it's described as orderly, understandable, aligned with how things really are. But a life lived outside intellect's guidance, driven by ignorance or blind passions, is seen as dark, unpredictable, chaotic.
Which brings us to that rather stark saying the source quotes, "The enmity of a rational person is better than the affection of an ignorant one." That sounds harsh at first.
It does sound harsh, doesn't it? But the sources explain it using that old story, the friendship of the bear's aunt.
The bear's aunt?
Yeah, or sometimes just a bear friend. The story goes, a man befriends a bear. One day the man is sleeping and a fly lands on his face. The bear, wanting to help its friend, wanting to show affection, but acting out of complete ignorance, picks up a huge rock to swat the fly and kills his friend.
Right. Misguided affection being destructive.
Exactly. It illustrates the potential danger, the destruction that can come from the actions of a foolish or ignorant friend, however well-intentioned. Whereas a wise person, an intelligent person, even if they're your adversary, they act based on intellect, on reason. Their actions, even if opposing you, are likely to be more predictable, more measured. You might even learn something from a wise enemy. Whereas a foolish friend can lead you to disaster without meaning to.
So intellect brings measure, even in opposition. And this links to another key function of intellect discussed in the sources, moderation.
Yes, moderation. Il title. Intellect is the faculty that mediates. It helps avoid extremes. It steers clear of both tisi, which means sharpness, going too far, extremism,
Avoiding that.
and also sustilency, which means weakness, laziness, falling short, tafrit. This balance, this middle path between deficiency and excess, is presented as the natural outcome of rationality.
And this idea of moderation, this balance, is seen as absolutely core to the wisdom Ferdowsi embeds in the Shahnameh.
Completely central. Intellect is described as the mizan, the scale, the measure, the balance of what is right and just. And here's something fascinating. The source explicitly connects this Ferdowsi principle of moderation to the Quranic concept of the ummatu wasat.
The middle nation.
Yeah.
From the verse, Jannakum ummatan wasan.
Exactly that verse. This connection is presented as really strong evidence of how deeply Ferdowsi understood and integrated Islamic principles into the very fabric of his Persian epic. It highlights again that uniquely Tawhidi, God-centered nature of the Shahnameh, distinguishing it from, say, Greek or other epics that might feature polytheism or inescapable fate.
It really shows that deep spiritual inclination within Iranian culture, and Ferdowsi has this incredible voice embodying it, weaving together culture and faith so seamlessly.
Precisely. And ultimately, intellect is described as the yandu al-khair,
The spring of goodness.
the spring or source of all goodness. The wise person, guided by intellect, naturally seeks kamal, perfection, completion, wholeness, while the ignorant person, lacking that internal compass, tends towards zawal, decay, fault-finding, decline.
And without intellect, you can't even properly judge things. You can't weigh their importance.
You literally cannot discern the kamobish, the more or less, the proper measure, the relative importance, the true value of things. Everything just seems jumbled, chaotic, without clear significance. But the intelligent person, using intellect, grasps the sarmeh, the capital, the essence, the real substance or value of things.
Right.
That underlying reality is perceived only through intellect.
Wow. When you look at it through the lens of these sources, these conversations, it becomes overwhelmingly clear just how much the Shahnameh at its core is a book about Khirad, about intellect.
It really does crystallize, doesn't it? All the epic storytelling, the heroes, the battles, the tragedies, they all serve as this vast, profound exploration of intellect, advocating for it, demonstrating its power, its necessity in every single part of human life. From managing those deep inner conflicts we talked about, to building a just society, to understanding our place in the cosmos. It's all viewed through the lens of intellect.
This deep dive really highlights how Ferdowsi, at least as interpreted by these philosophers, wasn't just telling stories. He was embedding these incredibly deep philosophical insights about intellect, about tragedy, about the human condition into the narrative, making it so much more than just history or myth.
Exactly. And the sources suggest he wasn't just describing the problems either. He was offering tools rooted in Khirad, in intellect, and in spiritual awareness for actually navigating life, for dealing with those profound inner conflicts and the inevitable external challenges we all face.
So as we wrap up this particular deep dive, here's a thought, maybe something for you, our listener, to carry away and mull over. We've talked a lot about how intellect, Khirad, is presented here not just as logic, but as this key that breaks bonds, frees us from attachments. It's the source of hope, the principle of moderation, the guide through even the deepest tragedies and conflicts. So maybe think about a time in your own life where you felt bound. Maybe stuck on a problem, caught in a habit you don't like, or just trapped in a rigid way of seeing things. What might it look like to approach that bond, not just by trying harder, not just with willpower, but by consciously trying to bring in this multifaceted Khirad we've discussed? Could you seek moderation in how you approach it? Could you look for the deeper capital, the sarmeh, the real essence of the situation? Could you perhaps lean into the idea that intellect itself, applied thoughtfully, never truly fails in guiding towards understanding or goodness? Could engaging with those inner conflicts, those external challenges, through this lens of wisdom actually reveal a different path? A path towards freedom, maybe towards peace? Something to consider. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into Ferdowsi's philosophical legacy through these specific sources. This was deep dive number 8 in our series of 15. We really look forward to continuing the exploration with you next time on Wisdom Unveiled.